Hey,
Dan's
what do you
joining
know?
us. There's the man.
Hello, guys.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
Good. How's it going?
Oh, we've been having an incredible conversation. You missed out on all good stuff.
Really? I'm watching Mike Tyson's greatest highlights on ESPN.
Wow. Well, it'll be recorded for posterity. We're
Ah,
recording already, by the way, so feel
you
free to
are.
join us.
Okay. Yes.
But yeah, Patrick's telling us about his experiences right now with compounding pharmacy and how some people expect a lot more than, um, how the FDA expects a lot more than may be reasonable. And one of the things I was going to say is that the FDA really has to understand, and I know the FDA does, because like I said, the FDA is full of pharmacists, it's full of physicians and healthcare practitioners who've actually done this. So it's not like they're sort of operating in this space that they aren't aware of. But they can't sort of just come in and say we're going to apply manufacturing practice standards to a compounding. It's just not going to work because, as Patrick was mentioning, as I was mentioning, um, those standards would be expected for an organization that's making the same thing over and over again. And when you're doing something in response to a prescription, you don't know what's walking through the door tomorrow, and you can't expect the same heightened levels of standards. In fact, it kind of brings me to the next point, which is if the FDA cites you, what do you tend to say, Patrick, in terms of what you'd expect them to, how would you expect them to respond?
Well, most compound pharmacies wouldn't even know to respond, unfortunately, to their
483.
43, and thus you see warning letters already coming out
Mm-hmm.
of the audits that have been taking place in 2013, and we're talking about like shock and awe. Going from never being inspected by FDA to all of a sudden 15 compound pharmacies in your state have been not only been audited, but they've been issued 483s, and you know the
Warning
FDA is
letter.
now saying the next thing is a warning letter, and after that's who
Seizures,
knows what they can do.
injunctions.
I mean, are they going to do injunctions on a state hospital? I mean, the politics involved too, because FDA is political and they don't like to, in Houston, I found that the state funded pharmacy was doing some fairly irregular practices, and I called them out, and FDA, my handlers were saying, "Whoa, wait a minute! Basically, what you have here is we can shut them down for these, chewable antibiotics, and they're getting into all these other products, and
Mhm.
people got excited, and they were like, "Oh, but this is like state funded. You need to tone down your words here, Stone." And so that does happen, and I mean, I'm sure for private institutions, we weren't so caring, but if it's a state run or city run or county run institution, things get dragged on or what have you. I mean, the game gets played.
Yeah, but I feel like the FDA is now in a situation where they have to deal with the repercussions of that. Where if they ignore something and turns out that it's an NECC type of situation where people die, and they were found to be ignoring the facts because, quite honestly, it would be politically inconvenient. They would be in, excuse my language, but deep doo doo for that. And and I guess it really comes down to one of the things I like pointing out to my clients when I talk to them about responding, when I talk to pharmacies about, you know what, you may want to have someone like Patrick or me in your facility when you get audited, because the FDA can't just come in and say, I'd like everything that you have. The FDA's purpose is looking at quality. They can't just say, I want to see your trade secret materials, I want to see your financial. Thank you for plugging. I, I love how Dan does this perfectly.
That's why I got up. I saw Pat, and I went to my bookshelf, and I wanted to make sure people go get this book. It's an awesome book.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Patrick, you got a plug out of that, so that's awesome. Uh,
Yep.
no, but one of the things I like mentioning about responding to 483s and warning letters, and even actually the inspection itself, you need to understand how to maintain a war room, which which is more complicated than you would think. I know Patrick's actually been in war rooms when during FDA audits. And Dan, have you ever maintained a war room?
No, we have not. I have not been FDA audited.
Really?
Actually, yeah, I've been audited by sponsors many times,
Interesting.
but never had an FDA audit. And if I do, I'm calling both of you.
There you go.
As consultants.
As consultants. Well, I'll be a little close enough.
Now, Pat, in this book, you do talk about FDA audits quite a bit.
Well, yeah, that's definitely a theme, and it kind of what to expect and the basics and how you should proceed when you're called, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But as far as a war room, I mean, is that what you said, a war room?
Yep.
Yeah, I've
there's
never.
Two aspects to the war room. There's the war room, the part of the room where the FDA and the management and the most responsible individuals are at. Then you've got the back end where you've got the golfers and the people.
You weren't
that
supposed
part
to
of
know
the room
about
I've
this,
never
Patrick.
really been in, and that's probably not a fun part of the room because they're doing all the work. But you have the people that know where the reports are, that know where the lab stuff is, and you have those guys and the guys that are coming up to bat for interviews. Like if the FDA investigators ask for your certain area of the plant,
right.
You're in the pre-war room being told, don't say this, don't bring up anything that they don't ask about, and they give you kind of pointers like, don't be nervous, kind of breathe, answer the question as much as possible, but don't offer any of the quality, aspects that maybe we don't want you to talk about.
No, to be fair, here's how. I mean, I've been in these war rooms, and I can tell you that the first thing we tell them is don't lie. There's no reason to lie. Be honest. Be upfront about everything that you have to be honest about. But don't go in there and say, well, did you hear about blah, 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 and blah. Well, if you do that, the FDA is then going to say, well, since you're telling me about it, let me go check that out as well. So when we refer to war rooms, Dan, and this applies across the board, every time there's any kind of audit, whether it's a sponsor audit, whether it's an FDA audit, you have two types of facility. Well, the facility breaks up into three different areas. One is the operations itself, which is where everyone's still doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. The second area is the audit room, which is where the FDA is sitting typically, and they are looking at your paperwork, interviewing people. This is where the scribe is, where he's taking down copious notes about what the FDA is asking for and why they're asking for it, what people are saying. And then there's this intermediate staging room, which I tend to call the war room, and which a lot of people tend to call the war room. And that's where it's almost like the filter. So it'll be like, okay, the FDA will say, I'd like to see your manufacturing records. So when the FDA says that, it'll first, the guy who has manufacturing records will go to the war room and say, they're asking for the manufacturing records. That's when the guy in the war room who's not under pressure will say, well, what manufacturing records is he asking for? He'll say, blah, 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 and blah. Well, that's great, but you need to be more specific. I can't just give you 9,000 books. You need to tell me exactly what you're looking for. So that filtration process will happen in that war room. Mm-hmm. And you need to be careful about who's in the war room, because you can't just sort of say, I will give you nothing, and you can't say, oh, let me give you everything. Not because you're trying to hide anything, but because it's quite honestly unresponsive in many ways. Just telling the FDA, here are 9,000 pages, figure out what you want, is both doing a disservice to the FDA, who's looking for a specific answer to a specific question, and it's doing a disservice to yourself because you're just opening yourself up for questions and responses that just weren't asked for. So as a lawyer, I always say, be careful. You need to staff your war room appropriately. And actually, I did a webinar for FDA News, and I actually wrote a book for FDA News on staging a war room. And then I did a different webinar on actually responding to these 483s and warning letters. Which actually,
I like this idea of a war room. It's like we're going to battle. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly what you're doing.
I never had a war room when I got sponsor audit, but I mean, we probably had a de facto war room. Like it was like a makeshift war room where me and the coordinator just kind of discussed what they're asking for, everything you're saying.
Exactly.
I was the one under no pressure. or less pressure.
Right.
But sponsors often audit differently than FDA. I've never had an FDA audit, but that's what I understand.
The FDA is just like any other sponsor or anything else, and Patrick can obviously stop me if I'm wrong. There are different types of audit methodologies. The FDA follows, I believe, well, they follow different rules depending on what they're looking for, but it can be just following from source all the way through. If it's a clinical trial, they're obviously looking at a slightly different process. They follow a patient right through, for example. Or it might be, we want to look at just this one product and we want to see what happens with this one product. In the compounding section, it's really going to be how do you take in drugs? What do you do with the drugs when they come in? How do you maintain a sterile environment? And then one of the things that Patrick and I were talking about in terms of responding is Patrick mentioned having a lot of compounding pharmacies don't realize that they may want to respond to a 483 or to a warning letter. And it's critical to recognize that the FDA actually comes out and says, we don't require you to respond, but if you don't respond, your non-response is taken as you accept what we said in the warning letter. So technically a warning letter is a non-final judicial action, which is code for this is just the FDA's opinion. If you don't refute it, if you don't say, FDA, you're wrong, you're basically saying, FDA, you're right. So you should be very careful about what you do and how you do it.
It's kind of like that nolo contendere or whatever that is.
Exactly. It's very much like nolo contendere, actually. So you saying nothing is the same as you accepting the charges.
That the final word was already submitted, and
exactly.
you're gonna agree with that word, and you're going to basically do what it remediate. You're gonna fix the problems that have been issued on either a 483 or additional information given in a warning letter, and if those requirements aren't met, then the next stage is some sort of injunction or court proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
They have different methods of, they could do seizures. A lot of times they have to get the state involved to do anything, really, because of their lack of authority over anything right now except for foods. And fortunately for the drug manufacturers, they work in the drug arena, which is not, there's no authorization to regulate that. I mean, they have oversight authority, as you mentioned, but the regulation is still lacking.
The other thing I think is fascinating is that when I see the responses that most people, whether it's manufacturers, whether it's compounding pharmacies, whether it's clinical trials, the responses you tend to be, as you put it, oh, there was a speck of dirt found in your sterile lab. Well, let me fix it. I will remove the speck of dirt. That's not what the FDA is saying. You definitely remove the speck of dirt. Let's get that out of the way. But the FDA is often saying you have a systemic issue. How did the speck of dirt get into your system? When you respond to a warning letter, to a 483, whatever it is, you need to respond, A, to the immediate problem that the FDA identified, but you also need to look at what system failed and how the FDA wants that system addressed. Would you agree, Patrick, or would you say that there's a more kosher way of responding?
The major problem, and I do go into this in the book, is what FDA says, how it interprets what it says, and how the firm is reading that are completely different worlds. I mean, a few words mean 1,000 actions in FDA terms. And in the firm's eyes, they're thinking, oh, okay, I see this problem. They saw this problem. We fixed that one part of it, and we retrain our cleaning staff, our environmental crew, or we clean our pharmacy techs. We train them to clean better or what have you. But FDA is really saying, look, your system for doing this cleaning is inappropriate, inadequate. You need to change the whole system, and then you do your retraining, and then you do your remediation. But too many times FDA gets these responses, and it's like, okay, all you're doing is literally telling me what you did from the 43, but you're not showing me that your system has been improved.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff we can talk about here. Dan, do you have something specific that you sort of thought of that you wanted to ask? Because I think we've been going now for an hour, Patrick. Is that right?
Really?
Yeah, we're probably hitting the threshold of snoozeville.
Wow. Yeah. Sorry for joining late, guys. But I'm glad I'm here. I guess if you have time, we could do another one.
Sure. I'm
But I
down.
just wanted to add, I mean, if anyone's still watching after an hour, uh, is it helpful when you? Okay, I have two questions. They're not related, but they're related to the FDA.
Okay.
Number one, is it helpful to buy the auditor lunch or something? Like, does it help at all?
You want to help? You want to answer that, Patrick?
Sites have this question. Like, this is a real question.
No, it doesn't usually help. Most of the time, the auditor wants to leave, get some fresh air, get some perspective. Um, Sometimes, I would eat lunch, but for the most part, I would want to leave, like to, even if it's just to the hospital cafeteria, just to kind of get out of the room, get some fresh air. The whole idea of working lunch is not a fun idea. Plus, here's my thought. Like, I have all of these records around where I'm working. Do I want to get pizza sauce, or do I want to get sandwich juice, or whatever food you would bring in? Even if you cleared off the desk and then now you're clearing off where I was at. I had a perfect little pile and I had it all organized and I was reviewing it the way I wanted. Now it's just been cleared. You've just changed my train of thought. Uh, and then we have to clean up afterwards. Maybe there's a spill or whatever. There's some lettuce, some shrapnel, whatever. I don't. I mean, I like to work in a clean environment, and I don't like to mix kind of where I eat and where Now, if I'm in another country and their custom is working lunch, like in Germany, well, I'm not going to be rude, okay? But if we're in country, most of the time they tell you, there's a limit to what you can get in an audit. Like if the audit's 3 days, you can only get like $5 or something. I mean, it's very nominal.
Really?
You're right, yeah. So for the most part, your domestic audits, the guy's gonna leave. He's a local guy. He's got a car. He's got a GOV. He can split if he wants. If you're in a hospital where there's paid parking, he'll go off to the cafeteria. But I mean, providing water and like refreshments, maybe that's a good idea. People get thirsty or they want whatever juice. Um, and as long as you say, hey, we do this for all of our people that come in, whether it's a monitor, a sponsor, or otherwise,
Well, yes.
we offer this stuff to them. Because if it's just, hey, you're here and we offer it to you only, then they won't take it because it has to be like a general thing that they do for everyone. If it's not done for everyone, if it's something special, then they will for sure decline whatever it is, even if it's a donut.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely if we get audited, which hopefully we won't, I will call both of you, and we will have our war room.
You like the word war room.
Virtual.
I love that.
The thing also is, then, you have to recognize that a lot of times, if you offer them food, they have to sit around you and eat. Quite honestly, do you want to sit around people that you're auditing and eating? You'd much rather talk to your co-investigator often in the cafeteria going, can you believe these guys did A, B, and C? It's going to still end up being a working lunch. It'll just end up being a working lunch with the person you know, as opposed to a working lunch with the people who are really scared of having you in that room. So it's a chance to break away and have those discussions. Often it's a chance for these FDA investigators to actually collect their thoughts, collect their documentation, collect what they want to say, and come back and have a new plan, a reorganized plan of how they want to continue. Is that
Yeah.
a fair discussion?
Well, yes, I believe so. When I had my sponsor audit, and looking back, I think they were really auditing the monitor and not us. I can kind of figure that out as the day progressed, because I've had other sponsor audits. but I did take the auditor out to lunch. We went to have sushi, and it was just me, her, and our coordinator. And I mean, we talked about stuff not related to work. I got to know that her husband owns a restaurant in New York. I got to learn a lot about her, and I mean, the audit went very well. And so I think in the future, I don't know about the FDA, but I will still continue taking the auditors out to lunch.
Yeah, I would say any non-FDA person, you always want to get their perspective, learn a little bit more why they're there, not just what they say, but there's things that you tell the client, and there's an agenda that you really have to accomplish. Right. And you really don't get that during the audit. You get that during the break or during the water cooler or at lunch over whatever it is you're eating. Because at that point, it's more of a collaboration, unless, of course, they're there to shut you down or to terminate your site, and then there's not going to be any lunch or anything. But for the most part, that's not why they're there. They're just there to do their annuals or biannual or whatever it is they have in their SOPs that they have to do, and they're just checking off a block. Also, too, like, you'll know if you've had a lot of queries, or you've had to change documents, or should I say correct documents. You'll have a much different audit. You'll have more of a compliance audit, and it'll have a different feel. I mean, every audit kind of takes on its own life, and it also depends on what the bottom line is and why that auditor is there. And part of your job is to figure that out and to maintain your professionalism, and if there is some deficiencies, to kind of strategize how you're going to control them and mitigate and remediate. And you take the chance to go to dinner and whatever else, so that way you can kind of get what do you expect from me, and how can I offer that to you?
Yeah, I guess the way I look at it is the FDA really is a regulatory agency. I mean, that the buck stops here. And with the sponsor, I look at it more as a customer. So, I mean, they were not there for us, but I only found out about that because we went to lunch and things like that. So with the FDA, I probably wouldn't be as, what's the word I'm looking for, laid back. I'd probably have a war room.
It's always best.
Yes.
Yeah, that's typically how it works. Anyways, I think we've really... Dan, you said you had a second question?
What
do you want to say?
Yeah, I can save it for the next video.
Okay.
You
Patrick,
guys have time, right? Do you guys have time?
It's 10:10 here, but yeah, we can talk. I'm going to hang up this one because it was awesome having you, Patrick. Okay. Thank you again, Dan, for joining us. And I'll invite you both back soon.
Okay.
And that's Patrick's talk, by the way. That's his book, Bubblegum Badge. Thanks all. Bye.